The Joe Rogan Experience.
In a way, I think that one of the cultural jobs this podcast has performed, and this is like whether deliberately or not, is it demonstrates that the old political lines that we used to comfortably abide within are starting to sort of break down. Because, you know, like something like an obvious signifier of a particular type of person, i.e. I go hunting, now we have to accept is coupled with your view that the agricultural industry needs to be regulated and it's disgusting. Now, there we have complete and total agreement, and we both can see that the way that legislation is set up is biased towards corporate interests, commercial interests, and profit. And so for me, bloody whether Chris Pratt having his own sheep, I think no problem, man. That's not. I don't need to spend my time worrying about that. I'm a little bit like Alex Jones, like with the why are we worrying about flat Earth if they've got them babies and all of that stuff. It's like, I feel like, why don't we focus on the things that are making a genuine difference to the way people are living lives? And it seems to me that one of the priorities is in a new global landscape that we're living with. What are the dominant forces and what are the goals of the dominant forces? And how detached are those goals from the lives of what you might say are ordinary people, or the majority of people, to use a less complex term. And
what's probably most horrific about reforming the system is that the people that are going to suffer the most are the people that are the poorest. So, like, if you think of fast food in particular, right? There's a lot of really poor people that rely on fast food because it's very inexpensive. If you go and you can get a lot of calories for a small amount of money, right? But if you go from the fast food restaurant and then you go down the line to factory farming, and then somehow or another they eliminate factory farming, and they say, no, if you're going to raise animals, you have to have the same sort of standards that we would expect if we knew you, if we were there. We want pastures, we want animals living in the wild. We want, fenced in, but like living like an actual animal. Not this crazy warehouse bullshit you guys are running. Well, that's going to up our operation costs. Well, then that's how it's going to be. So then the beef becomes far more expensive. Now, if the beef becomes far more expensive, then what do the restaurants do? Well, they're going to have to make things more expensive too. So who's going to suffer? The poor people. Who's going to suffer with cheap meat in supermarkets? Poor people that can't afford it.
No, but I think that what happens, Joe, is you have started to pull a thread that reveals how the fabric of our culture is corrupted, because it shouldn't be more expensive. The only reason it's more expensive is because everything is put into a capital-based ideology. I've heard many times on this show, you discussing universal basic income. This is like the beginning of looking at alternative economic models. And there's an argument for saying everyone has the right to a nutritious diet. Everyone has the right to a safe home. So if we start prioritizing those ideas above these organizations have the right to maximize profit, we go, well, hold on a sec, them maximizing profit, that's getting taken off the table. And then there comes your counter argument about innovation. Well, I would say if innovation slows, no problem, because we've decided as a culture to prioritize housing and nutrition for the majority of people. Now, you can say that starts to, that's kind of socialism, and I don't think that can work on a continental scale. I think we have to break down centralized systems, whether those are corporate centralized systems or national. I feel that the time has gone where there's too much diversity. There probably always was diversity. People are different. We're influenced by our cultures, our schools, our education, our class, our race. There's all these factors. And then to expect us all to live in this sort of single bandwidth of this is what America is, or this is what France is, or this is what England is. It's too different now. But it seems like the standards we're adhering to, unconsciously or otherwise, is these groups have the right to make as much money as they can, and to interfere with that is un-American or un-British or whatever it was, because this is beyond national ideas, I'm sure. So for me, you pull that thread. Oh, it's the poor that will suffer. Well, then no, we have to rule out the poor suffer. So what happens in the end? You start to get into redistribution of resources, managing and regulating the power of the most powerful people. And whenever that conversation starts, it gets shut down because they want to conserve.
Even in a capitalist system, wouldn't it be more ethical if everybody started from the same starting block? Well, that's what's wrong with the world, right? What's wrong with the world is some people are in they have a terrible hand of cards they've been dealt, and my point about food is that the people that are going to suffer the most are the people that rely on the cheap food.
Yes, your point is
valid. As soon as that cheap food gets pulled away, then a lot of those supermarkets and a lot of those fast food stores that rely on that factory farm food, they're going to be in a bad situation. Things are going to be much more expensive. And if things are much more, if they make animals live like, what is that guy's name? Polyface Farms, Joel Salatin. Yeah. He's a fascinating cat. I had him on my podcast before. He's sort of a farm reformist. And what he believes is that these animals should live just like animals. When he has pigs, he puts them in a fenced area, but he moves the fenced area every day. So like the pigs move to a different spot. And so they're just constantly foraging and eating acorns. And but they're living like a pig. They're living in a natural. They're not living in some crazy warehouse.
Yes.
He does same with his chickens. He has this mobile chicken coop, and he moves it from pasture to pasture, and this is how he operates his entire farm.
Yes, it seems again that a point we've talked about earlier, that we ought to, like, if we look at, like, no one knows what's right, so perhaps what we could try and do is replicate what we do naturally. And so there is an argument that naturally we do hunt. There is an argument that naturally we do eat meat. We
naturally grow food too, though.
Right.
There's an argument that, like I was saying, like getting into organic gardening. If you have your own garden, man, that is like one of the most karma-free things ever. If you could figure out a way to have your own compost, your own garden, and you don't ever have to rely on anybody else for your food, well, then you're not participating in that shit at all.
Do you think that the spirit of entrepreneurship could be turned to designing these systems? Do you think the only thing that incentivizes people is maximum profit? I do too. I think that it is possible that people would sit around and go, how do we organize a society that's fairer and just, that doesn't kill people's individualism or creativity or right to pursue different goals or to be who they are and believe but like, I feel like there's so much fog in the air. People don't know what they actually believe in because there's so much powerful cultural influence, so much toxin, physical toxin, literal toxins and toxicity, cultural toxicity. How am I to protect my children from cultural influences that are telling them you have to look this way, be this way, behave that way? These are the things that are cool. If you're not this, you're not a man. If you're not this, you're not a woman. As a parent, I feel the obligation to create an environment where they can grow up to be who they are, in inverted commas. And then when you sort of scale that up to a society, how can we start to recognize, look, is this time to look at different systems for living? And what I feel is people want to be involved in the power systems that affect them. Like if you have a group of 100 people, they want to be able to run their own schools, run their own care systems, be in charge of their own lives, not just be some little beam of energy flicked about by cultural forces that they can't reach or touch. It's alienating. And like one of the things in Marxism, and that and I know very little about this subject, is he says that when capitalism reaches a certain point, people will be lost, alienated. They'll feel like a cog in a machine. No one will have no pride in their work. No one will know what it's like to make a whole bicycle and think, look, I made that. You're the guy that makes the pedals. Now fuck off home. Like I listened to enough Jordan Peterson to understand that there are limitations to what socialism and Marxism can achieve. But just because capitalism is better than feudalism, that doesn't mean that's the end of the conversation, that we shouldn't be looking for fairer, better, more just ways of living.
Whoa.